John Callahan was a local Portland personality and a world famous cartoonist who had works in Penthouse, Playboy. He had sort of a regular cartoon that appeared in Playboy, a single panel cartoon, New Yorker, but also a lot of people saw him in weekly magazines like the LA Weekly, or in our town in Portland we had the Willamette Week, Village Voice, and he had been used to making cartoons largely about disabilities that they figured into the cartoons a lot, mostly because he was a quadriplegic from an accident that had happened maybe 10 years earlier as a result of his drinking and his alcoholism at a young age. And our story and part of his story is about him. What happened in his life when he recovered from his alcoholism was he got back in touch with his artistic inclinations and was able to find cartooning, which was something he did more like as a kid, find cartooning as a way of sort of like relating to the world, especially with his disability. And he kind of became hooked. In his book he describes like he didn't see at the time why everyone on the planet wasn't making cartoons, because he was so obsessed. Yeah, I knew John Callahan from just around Portland. You could see him, he was often on the streets, speeding very fast up and down the streets. He was kind of a thrill seeker in his souped up electric wheelchair. But then Robin Williams, after Good Will Hunting, he had at some point he had optioned Callahan's book, because in San Francisco, their weekly newspaper, Robin followed his cartoons, liked his cartoons, and also I think was close with Christopher Reeve, who had become a quadriplegic from an accident. And I think it was in honor of Christopher partly, and also about a very funny person.
You know, Gus turned me on to Callahan. And interestingly, I knew his cartoons, but I didn't know who he was. It's one of those things where you recognize the style right away, but you don't really know anything about the person who did it. So I was really surprised when I found out. I was like, really? That's a real story? Doesn't sound possible. And so coming into this, though, because it was Gus, I just kept everything loose, because, you know, I'll write him stuff and play it for him, and then he'll go like, well, what other kind of weird stuff do you have hanging around? And I go, I like that. And then we end up kind of using, remember that song you wrote for your godchildren many years ago? Like, how did that go? And he go, yeah, I want to use that. So it's kind of like a very loose process that we have, which makes it, of course, fun.
It's sort of so complicated, filmmaking, that it's a jigsaw puzzle. So it's always a challenge, and I think the challenge is sometimes something that is keeping me going, but also it can be like you'll see something in the world, a story, hear a story, experience a story, you know, be in the story, or else maybe it just came your way, somebody else telling the story, that strikes you as something that hasn't been looked into yet. So that's a lot of times the draw for me in keeping going.
You know, when you're a composer, you're just going to keep composing, whether anybody hires you or not. You know, when you're a filmmaker, you have to make a film. You have to get financing and, you know, a budget together. But when you're a composer, you're just always going to be writing. So it's just whether anybody has any use for what I write, or there's any medium that I could find it in. But there's nothing I can do about that. It's just, I'm going to be writing all the time, whether I like it or not.